Billionaire's son threw black Maid into the pool as a joke. Her calm response shocked everyone watching. What if a single moment of grace could change everything you thought you knew about dignity? On a sweltering summer afternoon in Beverly Hills, 58-year-old Ruby Washington stood at the edge of a crystal blue swimming pool, her crisp uniform dripping with chlorinated water. The laughter of wealthy party guests echoed around her, but Ruby's face remained serene, almost peaceful. Just seconds earlier, 22-year-old Tyler Blackwood, heir to a tech fortune, had thought it would be hilarious to push the help into the pool during his father's charity gala. What happened next would silence a crowd of millionaires and change a young man's heart forever. Ruby didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't storm off in humiliation. Instead, she did something so unexpected, so quietly powerful, that every person watching would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Have you ever witnessed grace triumph over cruelty? Where are you watching from tonight? Ruby Washington had worked for the Blackwood family for nearly 8 years, arriving each morning at 6 to prepare breakfast for billionaire tech mogul Robert Blackwood and his family. Her gentle hands had folded countless linens, polished silver that cost more than most people's cars, and prepared meals that fed some of the most powerful people in America. She'd raised 4 children of her own while working multiple jobs, and now, with her youngest finally in college, this position allowed her to help with their tuition while maintaining the quiet dignity she'd carried through every challenge life had thrown her way. The Blackwood mansion sprawled across 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, complete with tennis courts, a guest house, and the infamous infinity pool where today's charity event was taking place. Robert had invited 200 of his closest business associates and their families to raise money for a local children's hospital. Ruby had spent the entire week preparing, coordinating with caterers, arranging flowers, and ensuring every detail was flawless. She'd even pressed her best uniform, the navy blue dress with white trim that made her feel professional and proud. Tyler Blackwood had returned from his 3rd year at Stanford just 2 weeks ago, and Ruby had noticed the change immediately. The sweet boy who used to ask about her grandchildren had transformed into someone harder, someone who seemed to view the world through a lens of privilege and entitlement. His father's recent divorce had been brutal and public, splashed across tabloids for months, and Tyler had emerged from it angry and reckless. Throughout the afternoon, Ruby had watched Tyler drinking heavily with his college friends, their voices growing louder and their jokes crueler. They'd made comments about the hired help that made her stomach tighten, but she'd continued her work with the same quiet professionalism she'd maintained for years. She'd served drinks, cleared plates, and smiled politely when guests thanked her, even as Tyler's group grew more obnoxious. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the pool deck, Ruby carried a tray of empty champagne glasses toward the kitchen. She'd made this walk hundreds of times, navigating carefully around guests who often didn't notice her presence. The marble tiles were slightly slippery from pool water and spilled drinks, requiring her to move slowly and deliberately. Tyler and his friends had gathered near the pool's edge, their conversation animated and aggressive. She could hear fragments about stock options and trust funds, about people who didn't understand how the real world worked. As Ruby passed behind them, balancing her tray carefully, Tyler suddenly spun around with a wild grin that made her heart skip. "Watch this," he announced to his friends, his voice slurred with alcohol and something darker. "Time for the help to cool off." Before Ruby could react, before she could even process what was happening, Tyler's hands were on her shoulders. The tray scattered, crystal glasses shattering against marble as she felt herself falling backward into the pool. The water was shockingly cold against her skin, soaking through her carefully pressed uniform as conversations around the pool suddenly stopped. When Ruby surfaced, pushing her gray hair from her face with trembling hands, she found herself looking up at a circle of faces, some horrified, some curious, and Tyler's still twisted with cruel amusement. The silence stretched like a held breath across the pool deck. Ruby's feet found the bottom of the shallow end, and she stood slowly, water cascading from her uniform as she faced the crowd of wealthy strangers. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Instead, they moved with the same careful grace she'd shown while serving their drinks just minutes before. Tyler's friends shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter dying in their throats as they watched Ruby's dignified response to their friend's cruelty. "Tyler!" Robert Blackwood's voice cut through the quiet like a whip. He'd been across the pool speaking with potential investors when he heard the commotion. Now he stood frozen, his face pale with horror as he realized what his son had done. Several guests began murmuring among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record what might happen next. Ruby slowly made her way to the pool steps, each movement deliberate and calm. As she climbed out, water pooling at her feet, she noticed Mrs. Henderson, one of Robert's oldest friends, watching with tears in her eyes. The elderly woman had known Ruby for years, had always asked about her children with genuine warmth. Now she looked stricken, as if she'd witnessed something that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world she inhabited. Tyler stood at the pool's edge, his expression beginning to shift from amusement to uncertainty. The absolute silence of the crowd was clearly not the reaction he'd expected. He'd imagined laughter, maybe some awkward chuckling at his bold move. Instead, he found himself facing something much more unsettling. 200 people watching him with expressions ranging from disgust to disbelief. Ruby reached for one of the pool towels stacked nearby, wrapping it around her shoulders with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout 8 years of service. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I hope everyone's having a lovely afternoon," she said, as if she'd simply slipped and fallen rather than been deliberately humiliated. "Mr. Blackwood, I'll just go change and be right back to help with dinner service." The grace in that moment was so profound, so unexpected, that several guests actually gasped. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Ruby, dear, please don't worry about dinner. We can." "It's quite right, Mrs. Henderson," Ruby interrupted gently. "I've got backup uniforms in my car. I always come prepared." She smiled at the older woman with genuine warmth, the same smile she'd shared during countless previous interactions, as if nothing had changed between them despite what had just happened. Tyler watched this exchange with growing confusion. Where was the anger he'd expected? Where were the tears, the dramatic exit, the scene that would embarrass his father and prove his point about the differences between their worlds? Instead, Ruby was treating everyone with the same kindness she'd always shown, and somehow that made his cruel joke seem even worse. "If this moment has touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Ruby's response was about to teach everyone watching, including Tyler, a lesson about true strength that none of them would ever forget. As Ruby walked toward the house with quiet dignity, leaving wet footprints on the expensive marble, Tyler realized that every eye at the party was now focused on him. And for the first time in his privileged life, he felt genuinely ashamed. Tyler stood frozen as Ruby disappeared into the house, the weight of 200 judgmental stares pressing down on him like a physical force. His father's face had gone from pale to crimson, a dangerous color that Tyler recognized from childhood as the precursor to consequences he wouldn't enjoy. The party guests had broken into small clusters, their whispered conversations clearly focused on what they'd just witnessed. Some were already gathering their belongings, their evening obviously ruined by his thoughtless cruelty. Tyler James Blackwood. His father's voice was barely controlled, each word precise and sharp. "My office. Now." But Tyler couldn't move. Something about Ruby's response had shattered something inside him, leaving him feeling hollow and confused. He'd expected her to quit dramatically, to scream at him, to give him the explosive reaction that would justify his actions in his mind. Instead, she'd shown him a kind of strength he'd never encountered before, and it made him feel smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. Mrs. Henderson approached slowly, her elderly frame trembling with indignation. "That woman has more class in her little finger than you have in your entire body, young man," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the pool deck. "Ruby has worked for your family for 8 years, has shown nothing but kindness and professionalism, and this is how you repay her? This is how Robert Blackwood raised his son." Other guests began to nod in agreement, their disapproval now openly displayed. Tyler felt his chest tightening as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. This wasn't just some anonymous service worker he could dismiss from his mind. This was Ruby, who'd brought him soup when he was sick during high school, who'd always asked about his college classes with genuine interest, who'd quietly supported his family through his parents' bitter divorce without ever gossiping or taking sides. From inside the house, Tyler could hear his father's voice on the phone, clearly trying to calm major donors who were threatening to leave. The charity event that was supposed to raise hundreds of thousands for the children's hospital was crumbling because of his stupid prank. Children who needed medical care would suffer because he'd thought it would be funny to humiliate a woman who'd never done anything but serve his family faithfully. When Ruby emerged from the house 20 minutes later, she'd changed into a fresh uniform and styled her gray hair back into its usual neat bun. She moved through the remaining guests with the same professional grace she'd always shown, refilling drinks and clearing plates as if nothing had happened. But Tyler noticed something different in how people responded to her now. They thanked her more warmly, looked her in the eye when they spoke, treated her with a respect that had always been there but was now more intentional, more conscious. Tyler found himself following her movements, watching as she navigated through his destruction with quiet dignity. Have you ever faced something like this, a moment when you realized you'd become someone you didn't recognize? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes we all need to confront the worst parts of ourselves. As the evening wore on and more guests departed early, Tyler realized he was going to have to face what he'd done. But first, he needed to understand how Ruby had found the strength to respond with such grace when he'd given her every reason to destroy him. Tyler found Ruby in the kitchen at nearly midnight, long after the last guests had departed and his father had finished the most humiliating conversation of his life. She was alone, carefully washing the remaining crystal glasses by hand despite the industrial dishwasher nearby. Her movements were methodical and peaceful, as if the quiet ritual of cleaning helped her process the day's events. Ruby. Tyler's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. She looked up from the sink, her expression neither hostile nor welcoming. Simply patient, waiting to see what he had to say. He started, then stopped, realizing he had no idea how to begin this conversation. How do you apologize for publicly humiliating someone who'd never been anything but kind to you? How do you explain cruelty that had no justification except your own pain and privilege? Ruby dried her hands on a kitchen towel and turned to face him fully. In the soft kitchen lighting, Tyler could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else, a sadness that cut him deeper than anger would have. Are you all right, Tyler? She asked quietly, and the genuine concern in her voice nearly broke him. Am I all right? He repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. Ruby, I threw you into a pool in front of 200 people. I humiliated you, embarrassed my father, ruined his charity event, and probably cost sick children thousands of dollars in donations. And you're asking if I'm all right. Ruby pulled out one of the kitchen stools and sat down, gesturing for Tyler to do the same. Sit with me for a minute, she said gently. Talk to me like we used to when you were younger and something was troubling you. Tyler perched on the edge of the stool, his whole body tense with shame and confusion. I don't understand why you're being nice to me. I don't understand why you didn't quit, why you didn't scream at me, why you didn't make me pay for what I did. Ruby was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. Tyler, I've been working since I was 14 years old. I've cleaned houses, worked in factories, served food, raised 4 children, mostly on my own. I've been yelled at, disrespected, and treated like I was invisible more times than I can count. But I learned something important along the way. She paused, making sure he was truly listening. When someone treats you badly, you have a choice. You can let their cruelty make you cruel, or you can choose to remain who you are. I've spent 68 years building the person I am, kind, hardworking, dignified. I wasn't about to let your pain change that. My pain. Tyler looked up sharply. What do you mean? Tyler, I've watched you grow up. I was here through your parents' divorce, through your struggles at school, through every disappointment and hurt feeling. I know you're not cruel by nature. Today, you were hurting, and you decided to share that hurt with someone you knew couldn't fight back. That says more about your pain than it does about who you really are. If you've been enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales about the power of forgiveness and grace. Tyler stared at her, tears he'd been holding back for months finally beginning to flow. Ruby's words had unlocked something inside him, a recognition of his own brokenness that he'd been too proud to acknowledge. 3 hours later, Tyler and Ruby were still sitting in the kitchen, sharing stories and tears in a conversation that would change both their lives forever. Tyler had told her about the loneliness he'd felt during his parents' divorce, about feeling abandoned by his father, who'd thrown himself into work, about the pressure of living up to impossible expectations while watching his family fall apart. Ruby had listened with the same patient kindness she'd shown him as a child, offering wisdom earned through decades of her own struggles and triumphs. "I need to make this right," Tyler said as the first hints of dawn began creeping through the kitchen windows. "Not just apologize, really make it right. The charity donations that were lost tonight, the humiliation I caused you, all of it." Ruby reached across the small kitchen table and patted his hand gently. "The humiliation is already forgotten, Tyler. What matters now is what you choose to do next." Over the following weeks, Tyler threw himself into making amends with the same intensity he'd once reserved for parties and pranks. He personally called every guest who'd left early, apologizing and asking them to reconsider their donations to the Children's Hospital. He organized a second charity event, this time working alongside Ruby as an equal partner, serving guests and learning firsthand what dignity and service really meant. Most importantly, he began the slow work of rebuilding his relationship with his father, who'd been so moved by Tyler's transformation that he'd started spending more time at home and less time hiding in his office. Ruby became more than an employee to the Blackwood family. She became Tyler's mentor in the art of living with grace under pressure. She taught him that true strength wasn't about having power over others, but about maintaining your integrity when others tried to strip it away. She showed him that kindness wasn't weakness, but the most difficult and important choice a person could make. 6 months later, at Tyler's college graduation, Ruby sat in the front row alongside Robert Blackwood, both watching with pride as Tyler was recognized for his volunteer work with local homeless shelters and food banks. In his graduation speech, Tyler spoke about learning the difference between having class and showing class, a lesson he'd learned from a woman whose grace had saved him from becoming someone he would have hated. The pool incident became family legend, but not for the reasons Tyler had originally intended. It became the story of how Ruby Washington's quiet dignity had transformed a spoiled young man into someone worthy of the privileges he'd been born with. Robert Blackwood often told business associates that his son's real education hadn't happened at Stanford. It had happened in their kitchen, learning humility from a woman who had every reason to give up on him but chose grace instead. Today, Tyler runs the Blackwood Foundation's youth mentorship program, working with teenagers who've lost their way just as he once had. Ruby, now officially retired, still visits the Blackwood house every Sunday for dinner, where she's treated not as former help but as beloved family. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and that grace has the power to transform both the giver and the receiver. If you enjoyed this story about the transformative power of grace and forgiveness, please remember to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the goodness that exists in ordinary people. Thank you for joining us on this journey tonight.